In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Scots language, a bit of history, its relationship to English, and what it's like for an English speaker like me to learn such a closely related language. I'll be joined by fellow polyglot Richard Simcott to compare our experiences. I'll also give you some examples of the pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary of Scots, as well as some resources about how you can find out about this fascinating language. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about Scottish Gaelic, which is a Celtic language closely related to Irish and therefore only distantly related to English. Gaelic is a language that was brought to Scotland from Ireland in the 4th century and has developed along separate lines from Gaelic, same spelling but pronounced Gaelic, as spoken in Ireland and better known as Irish. Now, both of these are totally distinct from garlic, a pungent flavoured vegetable. What I am talking about here is the Scots language, which, like English, is a Germanic language with quite a lot of French and bits of Old Norse and other stuff sprinkled in. Now, I suppose I should address the elephant in the room, or what the Scots call the lang nebbit beastie in the shomer. Not really. Said elephant would be the question of whether Scots is a dialect of English or a language in its own right. Now, from a purely linguistic point of view, the question is meaningless, so that's easy. There is no scientific distinction between a language and a dialect. You can't look at a group of languages and know which ones are dialects and which ones are languages. Historically, you can look at how languages are related to each other, and we tend to do this in family trees, in which case Scots and English make up the Anglic branch of the Anglo-Frisian languages, which in turn are part of the Ingvaeonic branch of West Germanic. So there you go. Now that's a very Victorian way of looking at things. They did love those hierarchies, didn't they, those Victorians, with one thing turning neatly into something else or several other things. In reality, things tend to be a lot more complicated. If you think of English today, where in some parts of the world accents change every few miles, and if you drive for an hour people will have a totally different word for bread roll, it must have been much more complex in Northern Europe in the 5th century, when people didn't move around much or communicate with each other across great distances. Every village probably had its own distinctive way of speaking. Now imagine if some of these people all went and lived together on an island somewhere. Actually, you don't need to imagine it. That's exactly what happened.
Anglia ferse un forstethleth, Anglia todaye.
God afternoon, and welcome to Anglia today. The great news story of the moment continues to be the Great Migration to Britannia. And with me this evening I have one of the organisers, Ethelfrith the Unkempt. Ethelfrith, what is it that's prompted so many Angles and Saxons to uproot themselves and move to Britannia?
Well, that's not just Angles and Saxons. We're also working very closely with the Jutes and the Frisian, and they will also be joining us.
I've never heard of the Jutes and the Frisian. Where are they from?
People don't talk about them very much, but I'm sure they're all very nice. The Jutes are from Juteland, and the Frisian, I'm not really sure where they're from. But anyway, so the reason that we're going to Britannia is that the Brythonic people have invited us over to protect them from the Scots and the Picts. So we're going to go there and steal all the land.
Are you going to learn the language?
Brythonic? No, I heard that that's not worth learning. And in any case, that's very difficult. No, I imagine, we'll pick up a bit of West Anglian here and Central Anglian there, and they'll pick up some East Anglian from us, and then we'll all be learning a bit of Saxon, a bit of Jutish, and I imagine it all just kind of mixed together as a kind of melting pot.
What are you going to do about the local people when you get there?
Well, mixed opinions on that one. Some people say we should kill them all. Others say that we should drive them up into the hills. And then there's some people think that we should assimilate them to our culture Through intermarriage.
Intermarriage, is that a euphemism?
Yeah, I would imagine so.
So the Angles and the Saxons, and not to forget the Jutes and the Frisians, get to this island and group together in different ways in different places. Cut off from the folks back home, they start to form new identities and their languages change to express that. The differences in speech from village to village back on the mainland get polished off in a process called dialect levelling. These new Germanic varieties take hold in the east of England and southeastern Scotland. Meanwhile, Brythonic Celtic languages are still spoken in Wales, Cornwall and Cumbria. Gaelic and Pictish, which is probably related to Brythonic, are spoken in the rest of Scotland. Southeastern Scotland is mainly colonised by Angles from what is now Schleswig-Holstein, as is northeastern England. They call their language Northumbrish or Northumbrian. By the end of the 9th century, northern Northumbria was cut off from the rest of the Anglo-Saxon world by the Danelaw, an area settled and governed by Norse-speaking Scandinavians. So Scots started to develop totally independently from the other Anglo-Saxon varieties. The language of government in Scotland went from Gaelic to Anglo-Norman under King David I. No, not that one. And then Scots by the early 16th century. As Max Weinreich once said, "A Sprach is a dialect mit an Armee und Flot." So now, Scots has its own army and navy. Meanwhile, south of the border, English had developed along very different lines. The Old English Literary Standard had been based on the Wessex dialect, but not many people minded because so few of them could read. The Norse influence from the Danelaw transformed the grammar of English spoken in that area, but nobody minded since the Norman invasion meant that no one who was anyone spoke English much anymore anyway. When English re-emerged, a new prestige dialect based on Norse and Norman-influenced Mercian developed. English and Scots by this time were so different as to be mutually unintelligible. As recorded in a meeting between the Scots regent Mary of Guise and an English herald, where they had to resort to French to understand each other.
16th of February 1560, William Flower, an English officer at arms, delivers a message to Mary of Guise, regent of Scotland.
Madam, I bear to you a message from His Grace the Duke of Norfolk.
Ah, thanks for that. That's an awful long road from Norfolk all the way to Edinburgh. You have to be fair for fortin.
Yes. You are most gracious, I think.
I didn't ken about gracious. I was just saying you have a face like a melted welly after your long journey. Who is the Duke?
Who is he?
Aye.
Thomas Howard, cousin to Her Majesty.
Aye, I ken why he is. I was asking who he is, Ken.
Who's Ken?
Who's? Aye, I ken who's. You're in my house, the new. Do you not understand a word I'm saying? Maybe we'd be better off with the French. Parlez-vous français?
Mais oui, madame. Il y a une souris dans la maison.
There a moose in the house. I heard English folk I said that because it was the only thing they kent how to say in the Scots, but apparently no. Ne vous inquiétez pas, Monsieur Flower. Le chat est sous la table.
Since that time, however, Scots and English have moved much closer to each other. In 1603, with the death of Elizabeth I, James VI of Scotland became James I of England. Under this Union of the Crowns, Union of the Crowns, Scotland and England remained independent countries that just happened to have the same king as each other. It was very significant for the history of the language. James had written extensively in Scots and was an expert on Scots literature, but when he moved his court to London, English became fashionable among the upper classes in Scotland. That was the birth of Scottish English. Meanwhile, Scots began to be seen as provincial and unrefined. English became the language of education and writing, but Scots remained the spoken language of ordinary people. Today, it's spoken by at least 1.6 million people. Many use it in a situation of diglossia, where they use more Scots words and grammar in informal situations, but mix in increasing amounts of English as things get more formal or when speaking to non-Scots speakers. So what is Scots like? Sorry, who's working continuity here? This isn't the hair. No, this isn't the hair I had in the last scene. I had the COVID lockdown hair. Well, can it be fixed in post? I just hope nobody notices. So let's start with pronunciation. The distinction between Scots and Scottish Standard English is much less marked in terms of pronunciation. Because despite the misguided efforts of 19th century elocution teachers, Scottish Standard English is pronounced with a Scots accent. Scottish accents are rhotic, which means that R sounds occur between vowels and consonants or between vowels and silents. This means that in Scottish accents, words like car and park have an R sound, as they do in most North American and Irish accents. Compare this to accents from most of England and Wales, Africa, India, Australia and New Zealand, where the R only occurs before a vowel. For example, car, park, rare, around. The Scots R can be a trill, round the ragged rocks, but this tends to only be used with special emphasis. Most of the time it is a tap, round the ragged rocks. The rhotic R can often not make contact with the roof of the mouth, resulting in an R-coloured vowel, park, car. Scots makes the distinction between w and wh, so which. In the Doric variety of Scots, spoken in the northeast, this is pronounced with an F sound, which gives wonderful question words like fit, fa, fu, for, fan. The ch sound occurs in Scottish Standard English in borrowings from Gaelic, like loch, and in place names like Ochtermachty. It is more widespread in the Scots language, in words like aricht, heich, ocht, and nuch. You will notice that the English cognates of these words have a GH in the spelling. That's because English had the ch sound in these words when the spelling was fixed, but the sound was lost at some point during the course of the 17th century. Scots and Scottish Standard English don't distinguish between the trap and palm, lot and thought, foot and goose vowels. This means that palm and palm, bot and bot, pull and pool sound the same as each other. Scots and Scottish English make some distinctions that most English accents don't. For example, barth, berth, airn, arn, fur, far are not homophones in Scotland. Scots has an additional vowel, u, which occurs in words like good, school, and mun. This means that tune, town, and tune, tune are not homophones. There is also the diphthong ui, which contrasts with e, so say and p do not rhyme. And now let's talk about grammar. I love how many common verbs in Scots have their own special negative form. He, hinna, de, dinner, can, canne, will, wolna, ocht, ochtne, umne, is, isne, arne. Where a contracted form exists, there are two options for the negative. Amno, amne. Avno, ahinne, or ahivne. Alno, awolne. Scots and modern English treat negatives differently. For example, I never said naething to naebody. Now, before you grab your pearls in horror because you've been told that two negatives make a positive, please realise that that may be true of maths, but not necessarily in language. Research suggests that a majority of languages exhibit either emphatic negation, where multiple negatives reinforce each other, or negative concord, where the verb must be in the negative form to agree with other negatives in the clause. Я никогда никому ничего не сказал. Je n'ai jamais rien dit à personne. Non ho mai detto niente a nessuno. Nunca dije nada a nadie. I ain't never said nothing to nobody. Scots is actually in both camps. Sometimes negatives do cancel each other out. She's no happy means she's not unhappy. Tag questions also work like that. You can't talk Scots, can you no? For you can't speak Scots, can you? Modals are used differently between Scots and English. You have to be her sister doesn't mean you have to play her sister in a play. It means you must be her sister. You haven't to smoking here doesn't mean smoking isn't obligatory. It means it's not allowed. And the door didn't want to open doesn't mean that the door suddenly developed a personality and a will of its own. It's just that it wouldn't open. Now, where words are concerned, there are many thousands of words in general use which are unique to the Scots language. For te ken, which means to know. For te kyk, to look, which is cognate with the Dutch kyke. Dreich, which is a kind of grey, bleak, dismal weather, which can very occasionally be experienced in Scotland. Bairn and ween for child, bonny for beautiful. There are, of course, lots of cognates, words that come from the same root and mean similar things between Scots and English. And that means that there are also lots of false friends. Greet means to cry. Messages, to get the messages means to do the shopping, to buy groceries. Peace can mean a snack or a sandwich. Cry can mean to call. And how can mean both how and why. Now, if you've ever learned another Germanic language, you'll know all about strong verbs, which have unpredictable past and past participle forms. So in English, we have see, saw, seen. German has zingen, sang, gesungen. Dutch, kopen, kochte, gekocht, etc. So it's no surprise that Scots has these as well. Jump, jamp, jumpen. Pit, pat, pitten. Bring, brang, brochten. Fecht, focht, fochten. Bind, band, bund. Creep, crap, cruppen. Wheat, wat, watten. Quit, quat, quitten. Wash, wish, wishen. I did a 3-week, 18-hour course recently taught by Michael Dempster, the Scots Scriver at the National Library of Scotland. One of my classmates on the course was Richard Simcott, and we got together afterwards through the magic of Zoom to compare notes.
So, Richard, it was wonderful to have you as a classmate on the course that we recently did on the Scots language or the Scots lead. Who was it for you?
I think it was bra. For me, I thought it was interesting to learn a language so similar to English.
Hi, have you done that before? No, similar to English, but similar to other languages that you speak.
So I've learnt the Ladino, and that's like the Spanish, and then I've done it with languages like obviously Macedonian's my home language.
Aye. Uh-huh.
And I learnt
Bulgarian. It's very close to Bulgarian, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Aye. So I have done it before. But it's difficult to speak when you didn't speak the language. You didn't use it in your life, and then all of a sudden you got to start talking and think about the grammar and think about different words, and it's pretty difficult.
So who different is it for you? I think for me it's that the initial barrier is that you feel almost like you're taking the piss when, because it's, what's the difference between speaking Scots or slotting some Scots words into your English with a kind of Monty Python Scots accent?
And for me too, I like you say, it's a bit like you're taking a push with Scots, because you tend to speak almost with the accent, but it isn't just an accent. It's also it's the grammar now, and that's a difficult thing. So,
and maybe,
no offense to anyone listening to this thinking I'm trying to be funny. I know I'm not funny.
Offend anyone. And we're both English, so maybe there's more historic baggage there than if you're French or American or another nationality coming in and speaking and talking.
And you do hear folk come in from different countries to the United Kingdom, and they'll learn, for example, local dialect or accent as well as Scots or another language, and in the islands, and they do that, and it's quite normal. No one says, "Oh, you speak bad English," or "You shouldn't say that," or "You shouldn't do this," or "You shouldn't." I don't know, but with Scots, probably because we're English, it is difficult. And I'm English and I'm Welsh, and my actual dialect is Scouse. My original dialect of English is Scouse. And what I found extremely interesting for me on the Scots course was that there were actual similarities between some of the grammar, some of the words, and also the turns of phrase that you'd use in Scots that you'd use in Scouse, like he's a hit the ball. He's a hit the ball. And you see that in Scouse too. He's an hit the ball, he's like totally nuts. So for me, it was actually quite an interesting journey to go on. To hear Scots and not just listen to the accent. Okay, the accent and the grammar and that is not there yet. It's been 3 weeks for Scots. It isn't a long time to learn a language and to learn all the vocabulary, all the words and all the phrases and all the expressions in a really authentic way. It isn't like learning, I don't know, a totally different language family, like Arabic or something like that. It's totally different.
What's your best aspect of the Scots language?
I mean, I honestly, for me, it was I love the R's. I love the R sound in Scots, and I do like trying to learn in an authentic way a language that's similar. Like you asked me about learning languages that are similar, and I've done it several times in different language groups, and I've done it with. I learned Frisian after learning Dutch.
Oh wow!
My Frisian is no longer existent. Sorry, to hold my hands up, but it basically what I find happens very quickly is, and I need to make a big effort to keep it going. Is that your language can be subsumed by the more dominant language of the group, and that happens whether the language is mutually intelligible, and even the degree of mutual intelligibility doesn't necessarily matter. Yeah, I find that if a language is similar, it can just become, again, part of this globbed, Slavic thing that you speak, or whether it's a Western Slavic. And it happened to me with Slovak. I learned Slovak after learning Czech and Polish. And again, it's mutually intelligible. With Macedonian and Bulgarian, it's a bit different because Macedonian is my home language and it has been for 15 years. And it's a fair whack of time to really have a language embedded in your soul, I would say, more than just in your head. Yeah. And so Bulgarian for me is kind of, I can more easily do that. I'm in contact with Bulgaria, I have links to Bulgaria. And so I do keep that, and that is easier for me to keep. I actually, in the beginning, thought that I would never learn Bulgarian, but now I find it okay to code switch between the two.
Apologies if the bit where we tried to speak Scots was cringeful for anyone. I think one of the things for me about learning a language so close to my own is that it can feel embarrassing, as if you were mocking people, which I absolutely assure you was not our intention at all. I wonder if you've had that experience. What's it like for Czechs learning Slovak or vice versa? What about Scandinavian speakers? Malays learning Indonesian and vice versa? If you have experience of that, let's talk about it in the comments. One of Michael's stories, and he's done a TEDx talk about it, which I'll link to, is the experience of getting to school as a small child and being told that his language was rang. This reminded me of Daniel Ferguson's similar story about African American vernacular English. Again, I'd love to hear about your experiences of when you first started to learn the standard language of your community. Were you made to feel that your home language was wrong or inferior? Let me know in the comments. Personally, I will continue to delight in linguistic diversity and raise awareness about languages big and small, helping in my own very small way to convince people that nobody's language is wrong. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.